It's hard to think that way. You can't think that way about everything. It takes a lot of effort. But if you're trying to do something new, it's the best way to think. And that framework was developed by physicists to figure out counterintuitive things like quantum mechanics. So it's really a powerful method.
I do think there's a good framework for thinking is physics. The sort of first principles reasoning. I mean, generally, I think there are. What I mean by that is boil things down to their fundamental truths and reason up from there, as opposed to reasoning by analogy. Through most of our life, we get through life by reasoning by analogy, which essentially means kind of copying what other people do with slight variations. And you have to do that, otherwise it's mentally you wouldn't be able to get through the day. But when you want to do something new, you have to apply the physics approach. Physics is really sort of figuring out how to discover new things that are counterintuitive, like quantum mechanics. It's really counterintuitive. So I think that's an important thing to do. And then also to really pay attention to negative feedback and solicit it, particularly from friends. This may sound like sort of simple advice, but it's hardly anyone does that, and it's incredibly helpful.
I think it's also important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done.
Give me an example of that. Like, what's one thing that you've done that on that you feel has worked for you?
Sure. So somebody could say, in fact people do, that battery packs are really expensive and that's just the way they'll always be, because that's the way they've been in the past. You're like, well, no, that's pretty dumb. And you say, no, okay, well, what are the batteries made of? So first principles would be to say, okay, what are the material constituents of the batteries? What is the spot market value of the material constituents? So you can say, okay, it's got cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, and some polymers for separation, and a seal can. So break that down on a material basis and say, okay, if we bought that in the London Metal Exchange, what would each of those things cost? Like, oh, geez, it's like $80 per kilowatt hour. So clearly, you just need to think of clever ways to take those materials and combine them into the shape of a battery cell, and you can have batteries that are much cheaper than anyone realizes.
It's a good framework for reasoning where you're trained to think about first principles and reason from there. And that means boiling things down to the most fundamental truths and then connecting those truths in a way to try to understand how reality is. Because physics has this problem where they're trying to figure out things that are totally counterintuitive. And so they had to have a framework for getting there. Like quantum mechanics is incredibly counterintuitive, but it's true. And so so physics developed a framework for figuring out things that aren't obvious. And that's why I think it's a lot of advice, but it's the right framework. Just in general, critical thinking is good. Examining whether you have the correct axioms, are the most applicable axioms, does the logic necessarily connect, and then what are the range of probable outcomes? Outcomes are usually not deterministic; they're a range, and so you want to figure out what those probabilities are, and make sure, ideally, that you're the house. It's fine to gamble as long as you're the house.
Yes.
A subset of that is to listen to critical feedback, which you alluded to earlier. Always solicit critical feedback, particularly from friends, because generally they will be thinking it, but they won't tell you.